folks, but we've got Dr. Mike Rice, who's from the University of Rhode Island, and we are delighted to have him here. Sounds like he had a bit of planes, trains, and automobiles to arrive here this morning, but he is in one piece, and we're very much looking to his seminar. Today's seminar is sponsored by the Fish Innovation Lab, and so Dr. Mark Lawrence, if you'd say just a few words in terms of how that connects with what we're doing today.
Sure, yes, so on behalf of the Fish Innovation Lab, very proud and pleased to have Dr. Rice here and visiting with us today. So he's meeting with our Fish Innovation Lab teams today, and also was gracious enough to agree to give a seminar while he was here. And Dr. Rice has been involved with the Fish Innovation Lab since we were just a team meeting together and dreaming and putting together our plans for applying for the Fish Innovation Lab program. So Mike's been involved with us from the beginning, and we're fortunate in the last year that Mike has also officially come on board as a principal investigator for one of our projects that is being currently implemented in Zambia on invasive crayfish in the Lake Kariba in that region of southern Zambia. So, but today he'll be talking about a different topic, and so he's going to talk about some of his research and experience in the Philippines. That it's been a real pleasure. So in the COVID world, so much time we get used to just interacting with people virtually, and so this is my first time to actually get to meet Mike in person, and just looking forward to spending some time with him today and with our other teams with the Fish Innovation Lab. So thank you, Peter, and I'll turn it back to you.
All right, so just a brief background about challenges in aquaculture. I think to get Dr. Rice started is sustainability is always a big challenge. And particularly it's difficult if you are trying to implement a project or effective change. Here in the US, we know it's hard enough to do for various stakeholders, but when you're doing an international project, it's even more challenging and difficult. So Dr. Rice, whose talk today is going to be on sustainability and is focusing on the Philippines. And so I'm excited to see all that it entails. So Dr. Rice, we are so pleased to have you. The floor is yours, and I'll dim the lights for you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I decided, sort of given the audience here at Mississippi State University, and in terms of sort of the interest in terms of fisheries and wildlife, and the interest of your department, I decided to kind of give this talk instead of a fish innovation laboratory talk, because people are going to be hearing that a lot, particularly the fish innovation people. So I wanted something new, and building on my 40 years experience in the Philippines, which began actually as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Philippines. And so it kind of goes back to my earliest days on the ground in the Philippines. So what I want to talk about is, really kind of the origins, a little bit of the Sustainable Development Goals. This with the Brundtland Commission, which was in 1987. Up to this time, there was a lot of focus on sort of precautionary principle, and which led to sort of the environmental protection agencies. This is a sort of somewhat of a shift in underlying philosophy that's very important to get into. I want to talk a little bit about traditional small-scale fisheries and aquaculture as a potential form of integrated multi-trophic aquaculture that grew up organically in Southeast Asia. It's sort of a term that is very popular these days. What I'm saying is that some traditional practices have kind of come up with this sort of out by the seat of the pants. Want to then talk about intensification of this aquaculture toward monoculture. So this is the old story that we sort of see in terms of the development of agriculture in the U.S. and in the world. And now we're kind of questioning the wisdom of this. Tie in with some food security issues, and then model and carrying capacity, and basically developing some sort of incentives to get into the good practices, what we deem to be good practices of integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. Okay, so the origins of this sustainable development concept go back to 1983 commission by the UN to address really the sort of the growing problem of human environment sort of deterioration, natural resource depletion, many of the sort of the concerns of the 20th century. And this was put together in a report, Our Common Future, by Mrs. Brundtland here, who became famous enough in her own country, Norway. She was the environment minister, but because of all of this work here, she ended up as prime minister of the country. So very smart, bright woman is sort of the godmother of all of this. This sustainable development concept that she put forth, we see very much these days, where we basically have balancing of social, economic, environment elements in terms of the total sustainability. We need to take care of all of these. And then on top of this is some sort of governance framework. So we have at URI an entire department, our Marine Affairs Department, that just deals with governance issues in terms of their contributions here. So this is very much the heart and soul of the Brundtland work. All right, so let's take a look at what traditional Philippine estuary and fisheries aquaculture was all about. So this is from a Kodachrome slide that I took in 1981 when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Philippines. And what we're looking at here is a typical estuary in terms of how they develop their fish. So in the foreground here, we have an oyster farm. These are filter feeders, filtering phytoplankton from the water. We have basically like these spike nets that are set in the water, and they are catching on a seasonal basis shrimp fry, various species of fish and the like that are coming in seasonally on the river. In the background, what we're seeing are some floating cage cultures of some fish. So what we've got is very much a multi-use estuary that is built up organically over time. This wasn't sort of pre-thought out. Each one of these operators are doing their thing in terms of the sort of estuary use. Now, I show this in Rhode Island, and people absolutely conniptions. I mean, where did the jet skis go? Where did the how can you kayak in this? I mean, so there is just a different social view on how the estuary should be used. All right, so let's fast forward now to the mid 2000s. The decade of the 2000s, where this concept of integrated multi-trophic aquaculture was coined. And what we have here, this coin was, IMPA was coined by Riddler, a group of Canadian scientists. They might have fed aquaculture such as finfish, and we're going to put in feed inputs here. The feed, they're going to have some large particulate organic matter that goes to the bottom, and we might have deposit feeder invertebrates on the bottom that are eating some of that. We have some small particulates that might be taken by some filter feeders like my shellfish. This is my real area of expertise, is the shellfish here. So this is my part right there. We've got inorganic nutrients here that dissolved inorganic nitrogen, phosphorus, and these are picked up with seaweeds like that. So all of these in close proximity to one another. And surprisingly enough, this suggestion is looking terribly like the system that was developed sort of organically in Asia with these different species in close contact with one another traditionally. All right, so Asian is this a form of IMPA? I mean, I just sort of leave this out, for debate and discussion, because there's of course no real answer there. But the thing is, there are species feeding at different trophic levels here, there's more productivity per unit area of the estuary based out of this. So from some point, some definitions, this could of course sort of fit the bill here. So it's sort of a call for sort of a cross-cultural understanding, if you will, in terms of how people do things. I mean, they actually maybe they're doing things, but we need to kind of sort of take a bet and dig into it a little bit. All right. Now, the issue of this is intensification and movement toward monoculture in the Philippines. Fish kills have been associated with fish pens, have been a recurring problem since the 1980s. This is a photo that I took back, I think, in the early 1990s from a plane window flying out of Manila International Airport of these huge fish pens in the country's largest freshwater lake, which is called the Laguna de Bay, which is right near Metro Manila. And all of these pens here are where they grow milkfish, one of the major fish that are grown in the Philippines. It's a very high economic value fish, highly regarded. It's fed aquaculture, and there's conversion efficiencies, typically of 2 on these things. So, not so particularly great. It could be improved, but point is, there's a whole lot of organic loading that is associated with these pens. So this has been a problem beginning in Laguna de Bay, right where this picture was taken in the 1980s. And their first response to all of this was, the new frontier. Let's just go and do this somewhere else. So they went to Binmali, Dagupan area. This is the area where I was. And in 1997, I was on a full-year Fulbright sabbatical in the Philippines, and by God, the Binmali, Dagupan area completely went off. The estuary went off. I mean, just fish pens all over the place, floating dead fish everywhere. And we went around, took a look at dissolved oxygen levels thing, and by about 3 o'clock in the morning, they're down to 0. All right, so no. So this is sort of a recurring problem. Response? Newer frontiers. Let's move out to another place. I mean, this is kind of like the American West. Let's sort of chop down all of the trees here. There's plenty of more land. We can go get it. We can go get it in the West. That's exactly what they did. They moved west to Bowling out. 2002, fish kills there. Lake Powell, which is one of the major freshwater tourist areas. It's basically a caldera lake in a volcano. There too, everywhere that you can think of, there's these problems. So this basically begs the question: how much fish production is too much? And who decides how much is too much? All right. So what is sort of a science problem that we as scientists can solve? And who decides how much is too much? Is somewhat of a political problem, which we don't have much say on, but we can help. And hopefully we'll sort of get there. So let's take a look at this. All right. 2 authors, Inglis in 2002 and McKinsey, basically a Canadian group, 2006, came up with this notion of carrying capacities of 4 different types. One is a physical carrying capacity. This is basically how many fish pens can you cram into an estuary before there's no more physical space. I mean, cheek to jowl, boom, 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 boom. Production carrying capacity, which is how much fish can you culture in your area without affecting your own farm. So how much can we stock without killing our own fish? All right. So these are the things that we teach our students all the time. Stocking density, measure the oxygen, these sorts of things. This is nothing new to us. More also biological, or as the ecological carrying capacity. How much aquaculture can be done without affecting the natural ecosystem that this is is occurring. So, so we may have some models for ecopath and the like. To do. More nebulous on this is this notion of social carrying capacity. So one of the things that I mentioned, and if you recall back to the slide, of all of those aquaculture and sort of integrated fisheries operation in the Dagupan Estuary that are growing different things and not accommodating jet skis and not accommodating people walking on the beach and the aesthetics of not seeing this kind of the construct of nature. The social carrying capacity in Asia for and tolerance of this is very different than it would be in our Narragansett Bay of Rhode Island. All right, and that sort of notion, this notion so any of these here, we have sort of a conceptual graph of how this works of the degraded carrying capacity. It could be any one of these. There's sort of an overshoot and a crash on these things. And we basically want to find that carrying capacity so that we don't overshoot. All right, so how do we start off with we start off with this first with some modeling on these things. That's how we as biologists work on these things. And to think about a model is basically a representation of relationships among variables. It's an artificial representation of reality. They can be very simple, as sort of our conceptual diagram here, or they can be very complex, such as something down here, and having complex numerical modeling, such as ecopath or some sort of thing that is very, very data intensive. So so we're sort of playing off simplicity, describing the system, less data intense and heavy data systems. So they can be very simple, very complex. However, really, if we're going to get into this game for influencing policy, we've got to be mindful of this in terms of how our data is going to be used. So it's got this model, whatever it is, it needs to be complex enough to realistically describe the system under consideration, not being overly simplistic. But it's got to be not so complex that regulators refuse to use it. If the regulators are completely baffled by all of this, then it's not very useful. Luckily, that's why we have a cooperative extension system to help people along. Long live the land-grant university and its philosophy. And we bring this to bear in international international circles, and that's why Fish Innovation Lab is here and the like at the land-grant university. Case study number one, the Dagupan Estuary. This is where I spent my Peace Corps time, and I have a continuing relationship with the Bureau of Fisheries even to this day. And I take my students from the University of Rhode Island in January to this estuary to talk to these people. It's great. So what happened here? In this estuary, they adopted floating net cage culture for groupers in 1983. All right, so this is was absolutely cutting edge at the day in terms of the groupers, high value fish. In the day, the feeds were not developed yet, so conversion ratios of 5 to 1 on sort of trash fish diets. But even with that, you're making huge bucks in terms of profit on this, high profitability. Adoption of net culture for milkfish in 1992. Milkfish low on the food chain. The feeds much less expensive, and a domestic market in the Philippines that is huge. That quickly led to images like this, right near physical carry capacity in terms of all of these net pens in the water for milkfish cheek to jowl. Unbelievable. And this over-intensification really caused fish kills beginning in '97. That, like I say, by Fulbright here in the Philippines. There was basically a strong government effort in the area to begin dealing with this with some policy measures, which included aquatic zoning, where you can put fish pens and the like. So they're going to take this from a zoning point of view. There was a major study in 2007 by the Bureau of Fisheries and a Norwegian consulting outfit, the Plan Viva, to basically calculate carrying capacity based on nutrient loading in the water and how many metric ton biomass per unit area is next. So those calculations were done at that time. But they didn't have any extension on this. So again, we have this kind of like the science is doing one thing, but the policy doesn't. So we attempted to take care of this in 2013, and we basically brought in kind of the extension workshops with the stakeholders on this, basically to kind of take a look at this and get the idea on this. And what did they do is, as a result of the cooperative extension effort, the city government then now buys into this with a carrying capacity management system, which is going on from 2013, going on into the present, more or less. Now it's changing with each political environment, whether more or less or not, but at least it's on the books. So let's take a look at some Google Earth shots here. So this is the estuary in November 2004. These are all archived nicely in Google Earth. So you could actually go and see these things if you want. So at this period of time, look at all this estuary here, just cheek to jowl, just full of these estuary systems here. Here's the land where the people are. Here's the traditional milkfish ponds. So the ones that are I talked about that are part of the system. Shallow water ponds, not more than 1.5 feet deep. Light penetration to the bottom. You've got good production of filamentous algae on the bottom. Perfect food for milkfish. So side by side, we have kind of these intensive fed system side by side with the traditional system, and the estuary is full up. Here's the same shot of March of 2014. Traditional ponds are still there, but if we look at all of this, all of the pens are gone. Right. So basically, at this point in time, the political will was no, keep the fish in the ponds. We'll have certain areas zoned for fish pens. We're going to put the fish pens over here, so you see the fish pens. We've got still have our fish traps here, but we've got good flushing and sort of maintaining on the estuary there. All right, so the problem is that with the change of political structure, there's now a move now to put more back in and some more things. So this has been since 2018 election. There's basically a changeover, and now there's this problem. All right, so politics alone isn't going to solve this. Is there some way that we could basically put some economic incentives on these things to basically get back to this variant on the traditional way aquaculture has been done by basically having the major problem that is run into is basically the problem of uneven market values for each of these IMTA crops. So in the case of the milkfish, those are much more valuable in the Philippines than the oysters. That's not true here in the United States, and that's another story. But there, and certainly the seaweeds on a tonnage basis, small potatoes. So the thing is, how do we somehow even out this problem of this uneven market values that is basically providing economic incentive to individuals to basically get rid of everything else and go cheap to jowl, to physical carrying capacity with fish. All right. Now, this is where we need to call in our colleagues from the field of natural resource economics in terms of how to deal with this. So we're going to now call together our colleagues that know about these things. All right. So this is an example of an economic model for modeling of social cost as a means to quantifying this value of IMPA. All right, so we know kind of in our guts that as biologists that IMPA is a good thing. It's diversifying. It's kind of good for the environment. But how do we get people to buy into this when there's so much incentive to make more money? All right, so how are we going to do this? All right, so how this works. All right, so on the x-axis here is the sort of the output, and this may be sort of the farm output, sort of tons of fish or the like. Here on the x-axis is what we're getting for price. So this is sort of the black line here is our sort of classic economic price curve. This is our demand curve. So this is economics 101, supply and demand. And what happens is we have a certain amount of product that is being sold, developed and sold, and at this equilibrium price, we get this equilibrium price here. Now, if we go through and attempt to quantify how much it will cost to sort of clean up the pollution or mitigate this pollution thing, go through and cost that out and add that to our production here, basically on here, this marginal external costs. So that this external cost, sort of the cost of sort of the pollution, if you will. Add that onto here. What happens is we are going to knock back the production somewhat here, back from 15 to 13, a fairly good size jump in production. But in terms of increasing the price, it's relatively modest over time. So this means to say is that we're basically sort of building in the cost of this pollution into the cost of the product in some fashion. It's going to sort of ramp back the production a little bit, but relatively speaking, doesn't this it increases the price a little bit. Okay, so our colleagues, economics colleagues, basically say, okay, let's make the polluters pay. And this is a polluter, and this is kind of how that would work. So there's a lot of data needs for this. So this is kind of like the data needs for invasive crayfish or something like that. production costs for each crop component basically the market prices for each crop component. We need to estimate the cost borne by the aqua farmer, estimate the cost of it for restoring the water, sediment quality. These are the costs borne by the public that are not generally accounted for. Estimates of the degree of remediation of the extracted forms of aquaculture. So how much are seaweeds helping? How much are shellfish? How much are the invertebrates? Cost that out. And what this could potentially do is possibly calculate pollution credits to be provided to extractive aquaculture. So what happens is if you are in the field here to grow seaweed, shellfish, and invertebrates, what you would be entitled to is a return on your investment on the relatively inexpensive things to sort of payments by those that sort of do those pollution or make it. So once you have that, then what happens is you have some possible policy alternatives that you can offer and to these things. And these might be something like this: capping the number of fish pen cages and providing relatively high fixed permit fees to cover the water quality and environmental enforcement costs. So this might be one way of doing this is the fees charged by the government for each of these types of aquaculture would be proportional to what was calculated in terms of the effect. That's one way. Maybe, all right, to provide differential permit fees for these fish pens and various forms of extractive aquaculture. So basically, a discount on the extractive aquaculture people. And then the last is what the resource economists call the cap and trade system. The cap and trade system, which we've heard about in terms of trading pollution credits, if you will, in terms of how that works. But this is capping the number of fish pens and cages. All right, so there's only so many permits on this. And then holding auctions for the fed aquaculture permits with trading of this effluent discharge privileges because of it. So if you want to get into fish farming, you need a permit, but we're going to have an auction for those permits, and those wanting to get into that take part of the auction, and your permit will cost what you're willing to pay for your permit, and the fees then are offset by basically various pollution remediation programs, and that might be more oyster farms or more. So this allows payments from relatively dirty producers and offsetting and subsidizing some of the more cleaner producers. All right, so some of the takeaways on this. First of all, is that some of the traditional Asian multi-species aquacultures may be classified as IMTA, basically arising organically over decades. We can sort of debate and discuss that, but I want to hold that out as a hypothesis that these people have been doing aquaculture for an awful long time, many more decades than and just by trial and error and seat of the pants methods have come up with the way they were doing things. Economic pressures basically force aquaculture intensification and focus on monoculture of higher value species. So what we're going to do is focus on that which makes the most money and call it good. And then capping this number here and holding auctions for these with trading discharge privileges, this cap and trading system could allow for payments for these dirty producers and cleaner producers. I have some references on there on all of these for you if you're so interested in this and in terms of modeling. And this is basically, if you check the dates on these going back from 1998 till fairly contemporary, it basically sort of covers what's been going on in this estuary over time. Entertain any questions? Yes.
So you said a lot of these systems evolved organically over time and approached, they didn't really know they were approaching an unsustainable aquaculture situation. Reached.
Right.
So if you were giving advice to an island nation somewhere that doesn't have aquaculture, doesn't have estuary and aquaculture yet, how would you approach setting standards in advance to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past?
I would think that it would be kind of a extension education type issue in that we would have some basically comparative scenarios from different countries. One of the things, for example, when we deal with these things, like our Coastal Resources Center on various projects, oftentimes we will physically bring some of the clientele from one area, just fly them to the other area, just so they kind of take a look, and it's very, very light to see what they do. For example, I work a lot in Indonesia, and I work a lot in the Philippines in this area. Well, there is a group in Indonesia that are struggling with the same types of problems that the Filipinos have been doing. They're not very far from one another, only a short, maybe hour and a half plane ride down. They've never met each other. And getting some of that exchange is a really effective way to do things.
Mike, great talk. Enjoyed it. Just thinking about it. So, political insights on this. You've got, you're seeing sort of the short-term changes for political change, and they now realize, the short term, I'm not going to be in office probably that long. I can make people really happy by making a lot of money for a short period of time during my tenure. And then the effects, so to speak, wash down the river. Somebody else can deal with that in a couple of years, but I'll be well-liked and be economically popular. And you had some really interesting solutions in terms of how to try and affect that. Talk a little bit about, I guess, for me, in terms of just how do you ride through these political ups and downs, and have these been successful? Have they been tried? Some of the things you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, so this is kind of what kind of prompted this talk is that literally, I mean, just kind of like a little bit of background of me and the estuary. My boss in the Peace Corps was the Bureau of Fisheries Director for the region, West Raimundo Rosario. And his son, Wesley Rosario, was a master's at Texas A&M. And he was getting his master's while I was a Peace Corps volunteer. And he then, I think he got his PhD at Kindai University in Japan, and then became the director of the Bureau of Fisheries Laboratory in Dagupan. And so this laboratory is, it's got, fish ponds, it's got estuaries. I mean, this is like heaven for what we do. I mean, and the very reason that I go there. So he's the second generation. Wesley just retired, and the next generation basically is taking it over. So I've literally known 3 generations of leadership in the city in terms of how and dealing with it. So I was in on the project that developed the floating cage culture of the groupers in the estuary. And so I made a number of friends so that when I show up, people are good to me. So the interpersonal relationship, that's right. I was hell-bent to come here to meet you good people. Because it's really an important issue. Is basically the sort of the one-on-one personality. Now, that being said, yes, there's different administrations. One are more sort of ecologically and sustainably minded, and others want to take the money and run. And that's just human nature. It's what it's what is done. And so thinking about this really is to try to take this sort of economic, long-term economic approach. Try to get to the people that are sort of quick money people and say, hey, you can make more money over time, and probably make more friends over time, instead of sort of building your personal history of, oh yeah, he became rich, but he screwed everybody. All right, that sort of thing, and try to talk that out. In my humble opinion, that is what the land grant university is all about. I mean, really, trying to convince our powers that be in the provost office and the president, or kind of like short-term results-oriented people that really the long-term thinking of what we do is a really good thing. So I think that your question is multi-dimensional. It impacts our own institution, but also our clientele as well. I mean, it's very multi-factor. Yeah. Yes.
Tangential to what you were just talking about. How do they determine ownership of the water body? Where the tenants go, who owns that? It seems like some, if they were owned long term, there'd be more incentive
Right. All right. So the problem is that it is the aquatic commons. All right. So technically, there's no personal ownership. It's basically renting. So basically, the government is the sort of the caretaker of this. So to look into this, there is a classic landmark book, I think around 2009, written by a Nobel Prize laureate, Eleanor Ostrom. And the title of this book is Governing the Commons. All right. And she won the Nobel Prize for this, Nobel Prize in Economics for this book, basically grappling with exactly what you're talking about. And that's the issue. And in a nutshell, what I gave there in terms of the resource economics point of view, that's kind of the whole thing in a nutshell.
Why do you think of the all Asian horticultures and Vita is similar, or do you think it's a difference?
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, I think that there was, has been a certain amount of cultural genius, if you will, in terms of putting this. It takes an awful long period of time. What you got to realize is that, unlike when these are set up, unlike sort of a classic IMTA system where this might be sort of the same farm or something like this is doing the different aquaculture. All right, that's almost a recipe for disaster because you want to eliminate the most unprofitable part of your business. But these are different operators doing their thing. So the oyster farmers are not the fish farmers. The seaweed farmers are not the oyster farmers, and so forth. So they're all different people. That in part makes it work. And there's somewhat of a traditional community governance that goes in there. Is that there's naturally conflict between these people, and in part that conflict is maintaining kind of a balance of political power within the estuary. It's not by design, by any stretch of the imagination. It's much more developed over time. But people recognize that, yeah, this is our area of the estuary. And so forth. Yeah.
So I'm curious, what is the level of discussion about the role of climate change as we move forward into the future? So if these are estuary
Okay.
fisheries that depend on freshwater inputs.
Yeah. That's going to have a good deal of impact on all of this. First of all, and most obviously, basically this whole estuary system is right at sea level. All right, so if we raise the sea level about this much, all of that is underwater. I mean, all of those aquaculture dikes, everything is basically inundated. So we're going to have to basically build this up. The city itself is in terms of transportation infrastructure and the like, all going to be heavily affected. One of the other things that I have been looking at recently, particularly in Rhode Island, is the effect of the oyster shells as a reservoir for calcium carbonate, which is a natural buffer for seawater. If you get rid of all of your shellfish resources, by harvesting them down too much, and the like, you're reducing your buffering capacity. Anybody who maintains an aquarium knows that. You put some shells in there that maintain the pH balance. So all of those are effect. So if you teach your students about the carbonic acid equilibrium, that's the whole name of the game with all of those shells. Yeah,
I teach my students about that.
right.
Going back to Dr. Allen's question about the long-term sustainability.
Yep.
That slide you had with the list of fish kills, that's been happening for quite some time for people to continue the same new frontier strategy. And I'm imagining that it's not terribly difficult to just pick up your net pens and put them somewhere else.
Yeah, the trouble is you run out of funds, yeah.
So my question is there any way to convince the stakeholders in these aquaculture, I want to say facilities, that I don't know if that's the right term.
Yeah.
That relocation is more expensive than is worthwhile, and that they would be better off working to maintain the waters they already have.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's that's a real, it's a real, problem that where the rubber hits the road. So, if you want to move into a new area, first thing that you want to do is go visit the mayor. And let's say the mayor, we'd like to put in net pens in your area that it will mean jobs for people. It will mean that we're going to pay taxes to your municipality. And by the way, we'll put in a new basketball court for you. What he used to say, that sounds pretty good to me. If I'm mayor, I'd like the basketball court. Here's your permit. This is where the rubber hits the road on these things. And we really need to sort of step back on this and kind of, well, what's the incentive structure on these things, and trying to get a handle on it. That's why I gave that name of the book. That's why Eleanor got the Nobel Prize in terms of grappling with that exact issue.
All right, well, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. Great crowd today. And please join me in thanking Dr. Rice for his time.